I understand you're a chess player. That's what
Yes,
your colleague, what his name is, Assad? Am I getting the names right?
that's correct. Yes, I used to play chess competitively many
Okay.
years ago, and now I still do follow the game quite closely. In fact, I read the chess news every day. I keep up with the latest tournaments and events and the games
Okay.
if I have time.
Okay. I hope you're reading chess base. No, it's okay.
Oh, of course,
Anything is good.
I even have chess based on my computer, of course. Yes.
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. Well, I mean, nowadays, I mean, honestly, any player who plays competitively and stuff will have chess base or Fritz or one of the softwares. It's practically, standard, really.
Sure,
Um,
it's like having a grandmaster at home. Yeah.
yeah. No. Well, I'll put that on the blurb. So Wang Lee says. Um, uh, okay, fantastic. So you live in Australia. Are you from Australia?
No, I'm originally from Singapore, but I
Okay.
moved to Australia to finish my postgraduate studies, and I've been working and living here since.
Okay. And what were your postgraduate studies in? Because, I mean, obviously it wasn't chess, and I wasn't too sure through the journal publication whether this was just part of the topic.
No, I did a PhD in economics,
Okay.
and one of the research areas I'm interested in is called program evaluation. So the reason why we wrote this paper on chess is because we actually use a method, that is widely used in evaluation, known
Okay.
as a randomized control trial, to determine if the chess training actually has any beneficial effects.
Okay. Um, so you worked together on this paper for how many years? Because I saw in the paper the dates started in 2016, the first treatment and control groups. Um, was did you actually start it in 2016, or was just like when you actually managed to get it to happen? Because obviously, setting the whole thing up to be able to teach groups of children in multiple schools in Bangladesh can't have been an overnight process.
No, so actually planning for a field experiment takes a long time.
Okay.
So we actually started work on this in 2015.
Okay.
So the field experiment was actually only implemented a year later in 2016. And we also need a long time to analyze the data following that, as well as then polishing the paper. And then the refereeing process in peer-reviewed journals takes a long while. And so that's why the paper was only recently published, although we basically had most of the findings set up by, say, 2018.
Oh, really? Because I found multiple copies. I was actually going to ask you about this. I kind of figured that the peer reviewing was probably the reason why there was such a disparate difference between the first versions that I found that were dated from 2019, and then, of course, the actual publication, which just came out a few months ago in what was the Journal of Developmental Economics. If I'm
Journal of Development Economics, that's
Right.
right.
And that was, of course, 2 years later. But I've seen that sort of disparagement happen. I wasn't sure if you had made changes or whether this was just like a work in progress kind of thing.
Well, the way it works in academia and especially in economics is that typically one first releases working papers
Okay.
to circulate one's findings and to go to conferences and present it at workshops in front and seminars in front of other people to get some feedback. And possibly this will lead to some revisions being made in the paper.
Right.
And then following that, usually we'll try to target some high quality journals in order to get it published. And this can take a while because referees for these peer-reviewed journals, can take sometimes months and even years to respond
Right.
to these requests to referee a paper. And that one of the reasons that it takes so long is because a lot of academic referees get a lot of requests to referee papers, and also it's not like a paid activity, so people are just doing it, as a public service.
Right.
So taking 1, 2, or even 3 years to publish a paper in one of the top journals is, very commonplace, in fact. So what happened in our case is, I guess, not out of, I wouldn't say it's not normal. It actually happens very frequently to a lot of papers. You sort of have an early version of a paper appearing maybe 2 or 3 years before the actual publication of the paper in a journal.
Okay. Wow. Okay. I mean, I'm not from the academic world, so I didn't realize that the delays were usually that long.
It's not so long for some other disciplines, like in the physical sciences, but I guess in economics in particular, for some reason, it is very long.
Okay. Okay. So describe to the viewers what the paper is, because we've mentioned, like, been talking about the paper as if this was some sort of given, but what was the paper?
So the paper basically involves a randomized control trial of school children in Bangladesh, where we taught a group of children how to play chess, and we compared them with a group of children who did not learn how to play chess, and we followed them over time in terms of looking at some of their academic outcomes as well as some of their non-academic outcomes to see whether teaching chess to a group of children had any potential benefits.
Okay.
And the reason why we use this randomized controlled trial design is because it's highly regarded in the scientific community as being one of the most rigorous designs in order to elicit a causal relationship between the intervention and the outcomes. And so, for example, a lot of us would now be familiar that in order to determine if a particular vaccine is useful, we actually have to also implement some kind of randomized controlled trials to see how it actually helps with reducing the incidence of COVID.
Okay. Okay. So, okay. And what was the purpose of it? I mean, obviously you set up the study to try to gain something, because it's not an obvious conclusion, say, to in terms of economics. I mean, I've seen it done in psychology or in education in general, because the most classic, all the studies we've seen mostly promoted, had to do with the correlation between, let's say, learning to play chess and, let's say, our math scores or our science scores. I mean, that's been the traditional, let's say, interest towards these things. But what would your goal be towards as an economics field practitioner and researcher? What would you be hoping to find that would be beneficial to economics?
Sure, that's a very good question. Economics in recent years has become a bit more wide-ranging. It no longer just focuses on sort of the standard topics that many people would associate with economics, such as like inflation or economic growth or fiscal policy, monetary policy, or industrial organization like monopolies and the like. What we are trying to do here is to sort of relate our work to a field in economics that has put a lot of focus on early life conditions. So a lot of economists care a lot about what can be done to children at an early age in order to help them succeed later on in life, because we realize that, you know, if we want to use government money effectively, maybe the right way is to invest early in children rather than invest later in like adults by trying to retrain them with new skills when the particular industry, for example, shuts down. So the reason why chess can be interesting in that context is because chess offers a new way, a new alternative of thinking about how we can implement a kind of training activity that is not typically considered in the educational curriculum, at least in most countries.
Okay.
So right now, many educators are focusing on more traditional issues like how can they revamp the English curriculum, the maths curriculum, the science curriculum, and so forth.
Okay.
But we know now also that actually, in order to succeed later on in life, it's not just academic results that matter. Actually, it's the soft skills. It's skills that maybe cannot be directly taught out of a textbook. And this is where a game like chess, which is so rich in its possibilities, comes into play. And also one has, I guess, anecdotally observed that many parents around the world believe that there is some benefit to playing chess, and having their children play chess, because they believe it itself inculcates some positive attributes in their children's minds. So as a former chess player myself, I was very curious to know if there was any real solid research that had been done to show or clearly um, demonstrate the benefits of chess. And like the literature that you had sort of referred to, yes, several people, several researchers in the past have tried to do some research on chess,
Mm-hmm.
but we found that they didn't really look at a lot of outcomes that might be of interest.
Okay.
So they might be focusing, as you said, on some academic subjects, but not really on the sort of soft skills that might be useful later on in life. And so some of the soft skills, for example, I'm referring to are like risk taking, patience, creativity, the ability to focus. So we thought that these are things that would be of interest because I think just again anecdotally, I find that among my group of friends who are playing chess before, you feel that we all feel that we've sort of benefited from learning chess and
Sure.
playing chess,
Absolutely.
even
And,
just
and
at the
as a
high
chess
school
player
level.
myself, I understand exactly where you're coming from. I feel that it's been a great benefit in my life. And I don't just mean like, oh, because I'm right now doing something for chess base, but I mean in general as a person, as someone, as an approach to problems and to situations. It certainly had an effect on my general thinking and approach to different things. So absolutely. Um, but you started because I mean, for you to make this into as to a research study, you had to have obviously clear goals to be able to measure these things. You couldn't be randomly making interviews and hoping to find something. So what were the specific goals that you decided to try to measure, and how did you try to measure these? Because I mean, creativity, for example, I saw just recently a talk given by John Cleese from 1992 to a business group, and it was something that even he had difficulty measuring, even though he felt it was something that could be taught. But trying to measure this, as an actual goal of a study, is really not obvious.
Yes, some of these concepts that we're trying to measure are not so easy, and creativity is definitely one of the more challenging ones. But some of the others, like risk preferences or patience, I guess other economists before us have developed tools for measuring sort of these preferences. And
Okay.
so all we really had to do is to adopt these tools that have been used widely in the experimental economics literature. So what these tools involve are what we call lab games.
Mm-hmm.
We actually use real incentives, whether it's money or some kind of rewards, so that we mimic a real life situation where children are asked to make a decision, but it involves real life stakes. They're actually going to get something for making that decision. So it's not
Or
exactly real
nothing.
life because
I mean,
it's not really
otherwise,
happening. But at least if they make a decision, there's some real stakes involved. They can get some candy or some stationery or some toys and so forth.
okay. So there are
So
consequences.
so yeah, so economists have been using these sort of tools to try to elicit real measurements of preferences, and so that's sort of what we rely on in our study.
Okay. Um, So, what was the biggest takeaway from this? I mean, what were the result? What results would you say surprised you the most or interested you the most?
I think the main focus in the literature prior to our study has been a relationship between chess and mathematics, because I guess naturally, one tends to think that, chess is a game that involves a lot of calculation and tactics. And so,
Yeah, it's a very
there should be a
logical. We'll
natural
do this, this,
yes.
this. Sure.
So definitely we expected some kind of strong relationship there. However, there was a recent study that just preceded ours that was also published in a very good academic journal that found that there were no effects of chess instruction on mathematics scores in the UK.
Okay.
So this was, I guess, kind of surprising in the sense that it sort of contradicted some of the previous studies in this literature. So we weren't sure what to expect as a result of this. However, it's important to note that the context that our study was done in is very different from the UK context,
Okay.
because we're focusing on children in the developing country in rural Bangladesh who've never been exposed to learning to chess as a game at all.
Mm-hmm.
In contrast to the UK study, where about half of the kids already knew how to play chess even before the actual program was implemented.
How did you come about to choose Bangladesh, rural area of Bangladesh? Because the paper detailed a lot of the significant challenges you had in actually doing that. All the children had to walk to school. The teachers were absent an enormous amount of the time. A lot of these seem to be like part-time. It's like a housewife. I can give you the class now, but then I have to run home and do my laundry kind of situation. I mean, that was the impression that the paper gave. You had to because they had to juggle teaching with domestic chores, you know. So why this particular area? I mean, why not let's say a more economically developed area where these challenges wouldn't necessarily might not impact the program?
Yes, another very good question. So one of the challenges in setting up a field experiment is that you need a lot of field support. You need people on the ground to be able to implement the experiment well. And the reason why we chose this particular part of Bangladesh is because one of the co-authors of this paper, that's Professor Asad Islam, that you emailed, he actually grew up in that area and has a lot of local contacts in that area that allow us to really do a good job with implementing a field experiment there. So we have high confidence in our ability to actually generate like solid results by running something there.
Okay.
Whereas if you go to sort of an area, in any country, even if it's Bangladesh for him, that you're not familiar with, it might be very difficult to actually get good things done on the ground.
Okay, so basically it was because that was where you had the most possibilities of getting the proper support necessary to realize your project.
Yes.
Okay. So so there wasn't a lot of academic output. I mean, in terms of the results, you had the UK results said no, and your results said maybe.
Well, sorry. So I should continue with the question you had asked earlier. So
No.
we had focused on maths, but
Right.
we also were interested in one of the biggest results actually is in terms of the risk preferences. We found from our
I
chess
found that
training
absolutely
that
fascinating. I have to tell you.
sort of lowered risk aversion.
Right.
So that is actually the main result of the paper, and that I guess is something we think requires or it'll be interesting to explore further in future research because as we know, this propensity for risk taking is a very important attribute in life,
Very.
for especially for the younger generation now, where just choosing what to do with yourself can have large implications for how your life will turn out.
Right.
Whether what you choose to invest in, whether it's a new business venture, more education, more training, all these decisions have some kind of a cost benefit analysis that is required. And I think perhaps chess helps one to do that a little better. And also, it's just like when we play a game of chess. Um, I guess one of the great things about chess is that it allows one to conceptualize risk in some kind of a framework, and maybe that is transferable to a real life context.
Yeah, actually, it was it was fascinating to see that your first reference and quote wasn't from 2018 in the UK. It was actually from 1786 by Benjamin Franklin, no less, "The Morals of Chess," where he makes these comparisons of chess and life and how each one can be reflected into the other. Did you find that now, or was that already, like, let's say, one of the inspirations of your project?
Well, I didn't really know about that quote before I embarked on this project, but I
Okay.
think as I was researching because many people always say, chess is like life, and I guess I've read the book by Kasparov. He has a book that about how chess imitates, how life imitates
Oh,
chess,
he'll
or
love to
something
know
like
that you
that.
read it. I'm sure.
So,
He'll be like,
so,
of course he read it. Anybody with any brains would have read it.
but I didn't find that quote from Benjamin Franklin in that book.
Okay.
But but it's along, it's talking about basically the same sort of concepts, right? About
Right.
how chess and life are really closely related to each other.
Okay. So what would your let's suppose that you get this the results out and some region or school area or even country decide to promote chess based on your paper in order to not, let's say, necessarily improve the math scores, which obviously there's a little bit, let's just say, yes and no on this particular topic. But in order to produce, let's say, better risk aversion decisions, what kind of outcomes would you hope to see from that, let's say, from better risk aversion decisions? You mentioned, of course, that everything we do has to be decided, but in this case, it's less about, let's just say, invest more in study or invest more in this. Risk aversion is not always necessarily just taking a class or not. I mean, at least I don't usually think of that as a risk. What would you consider, let's say, a better risk aversion decision that could be impacted by this, by a young person going and maturing with, let's say, a better understanding, a more balanced feeling of this?
Yes, I guess if I could design a longer term study involving chess as an intervention, what I would be interested in over a much longer period is what happens to these children over time in terms of their career choices, whether they choose like the safer options, which is, for example, to just follow the traditional path of going to college, studying a degree that is well recognized, getting a degree in a field that is well recognized, trying to get a job in a large corporation, and then following, ticking all the boxes after that, getting married, having a kid, getting a dog, getting a picket fence
Having
house,
2.5
all that.
children.
Yeah, all that stuff. So that's sort of how the previous generations have sort of grown up.
Right.
But right now, I think the world is a very different place, and maybe that is not the best approach to follow. I'm not sure. But so one of the things that is challenging to the current generation of younger people is that maybe they need to start thinking more independently about what they can do with their lives, and maybe this cookie cutter approach is not the best approach. Maybe they need to start their own businesses. Maybe they need to be more learn more about technology, use the internet in more resourceful ways.
Take initiatives.
So if I were, for example, getting back to your question, so if I were conducting a longer term study, so say if I follow kids for maybe 10 or 20 years after a chess intervention, it would be interesting to see how many kids who've taken chess, might follow sort of like a more independent path, because that is, I guess, in a way, could be riskier, depending again on the context and the country situation and all that. It could be riskier, but it all involves calculated risk. Is getting a traditional degree necessarily less risky than actually, starting your own streaming business? For example, maybe you can make more money on Twitch, right? Or becoming a YouTuber rather than getting an engineering degree.
Or a
so maybe you should learn more about
sure.
Maybe you should learn more about how to become a great YouTuber, or maybe you should learn how to code like games, and get more followers or something. So maybe that's the way of the future, because the world is more interconnected nowadays, and you don't necessarily need like a traditional office desk job anymore.
Right. Yeah. It actually reminds me of a discussion I had literally this very weekend with my uncle. And he was talking about his son, and he said, well, my son, I explained how these things are, and I gave him this list of all of the degrees he could be getting, and I showed him the job offers available for each one of these degrees, and that's that. It can't be any clearer than that. And I said, and that's obviously the way to do it. And I said, sort of. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, your plan is absolutely correct if the goal is to work for somebody else. then of course there's no question that is the most logical approach. But if your goal is to, let's say, be an entrepreneur and stuff, then all of those lists and job offers and whatever have no value whatsoever. You know.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. I mean, I guess one of the benefits of being playing chess, especially at a higher level, is that you start to realize that you can become a real independent thinker. I mean, you first learn the rules, you first learn some names of openings, you learn some general strategies, but when you really get into chess yourself, as you know yourself as a chess player, you start learning about your own independent preferences, about how you want to conduct the openings or the middle games and stuff. And so learning how to think along those lines, I think, will be helpful in a different context in terms of thinking about your charting your own life path. I mean, maybe it is still the right decision for some people to go and work for a Fortune 500 company because your skills are very suitable for a big company. But for some other people, maybe it's not. Maybe they need to.
Or even your psychological profile.
Yeah, exactly. So, but just understanding more about the options and and being able to think about it more in a more in a way that allows you to really decide what is the right path, I think is very, very important. And chess, by learning chess, I guess it just teaches you a different way of thinking, possibly.
Okay. And when did you learn to start? When did you start, let's say, to really take chess more seriously and be competitive?
I probably only I learned chess at about age 10, but I only started playing chess a little more competitively at the high school level when I was like 13.
Okay.
And then in my teenage years, I spent a lot of time on chess, in the school team and eventually representing my country, Singapore, in the
really?
chess Olympiad as well as in the Asian Junior Championships.
Fantastic. The reason I asked was not to try to focus so much to put you in the spotlight on your chess, let's say, curriculum, but it was more to just try to understand at what point you began to learn chess and how it might have impacted your own decision process. So you would say, let's say, more by the age of 12 or 13 when you began to really become, let's say, active as a player and invest time and develop your mind towards that kind of thought process is when it began to really have an effect on you. Would you say that this has impacted your own life choices?
Let's take a step back first. So
Okay.
I think when I first started learning chess, the first time I played chess, I remember looking at all the chess pieces and I had no idea what's going on. You just move pieces randomly. You know what the objective of the game is, but you don't know what you're doing because every piece goes everywhere and then sooner or later you get checkmated and you don't even know why you get checkmated. So that was a very frustrating experience. And you can play many games with someone else who knows chess a little better than you and you keep losing. But when you transition from that beginner phase to, say, like a novice phase where you understand a little more strategy and what the objective of the game is and how you can actually do something to reach the objective, then a little bit of clarity comes into your brain. And I think this is related to what we've done in the research in this paper, where perhaps the children in Bangladesh also got this aha moment where they figure out that actually you can sort of see things a little differently in the world, if you think a little harder. So that's from the beginner to the novice level.
Okay.
But now you're asking me a question about, let's say, if you get from like novice to, say, competitive, at the high school level, what changes happened there? And I think one of the important things for me there was that I learned about this rich history of the game. I learned about how there were many great champions and players who had a lot of original ideas, who created their own openings, their own opening variations, and just following the opening novelties that came out every now and then, and I would read the latest copy of the Chess Informants, just to see, wow, that's brilliant, and who would have thought of that,
Right.
Knight F5 in this position or whatever, it's like, wow. So just being exposed to this level of creativity was really inspiring.
Okay.
It's sort of like discovery in science or whatever. People are coming up with new ideas all the time. So in that sense, chess was kind of related to academia. but it was very accessible because it's a game, and we all look at the chessboard all the time, but it's just that a new move would not have, appeared in our minds. But when you see it happen and then you understand why it's actually such a good move, it's again like, you feel like you also are involved in the discovery process. So it's very exciting.
Right.
And it sort of, in that sense, it motivates me to want to learn more about things in general. So of course I was very obsessed with chess, but I
We've
also
all
have
been
healthy
there.
interest in a lot of other things in life. Right?
I mean,
And
come
just
on.
this,
It's impossible to start
this
becoming a serious
this
chess competitor without being completely obsessed with chess.
curiosity also is very healthy if it carries over into some other fields. So I think, from novice to high school competitive levels, you do that. And some kids give up chess after becoming, good at the high school level, and that's great too, because they've already also gained something just by getting there.
Right. Yeah, I remember having a talk back in 2016 in New York with Neil deGrasse Tyson, no less. I was privileged to be able to interview him for about 5 minutes. Anyway, and I asked him about the chess and educational purposes. And this was before the UK paper. And he told me that in his perception, chess had nothing to bring in terms of, let's say, directly translatable skills. Let's say if you learn how to play Monopoly, you'll get skills in, let's say, trading and investing in real estate or whatever. And chess, as far as he could see, had no obviously translatable skills. And the only benefit that he could see from, let's say, getting to become a strong chess player that was translatable outside of chess was the discipline. That was the only thing that he could see, was the discipline required to become a strong chess player, because he said, well, that's clearly not going to happen naturally. And so it's something you have to pursue, and very methodically and very rigorously. And that for him, he saw if you could leverage that same discipline to something else, then you would have learned and be able to apply it to something else. And I always felt, honestly, that there was more, that there were other things that chess could bring that might not necessarily be so easily measured, but that weren't either math or discipline, and not to dismiss the discipline factor. So I was really, really, really inspired to see your paper that actually focused on something different and actually found measurable benefits. How did you go about measuring, let's say, the other things? I mean, the risk-averse was obviously one of the big things that came out. But were there anything else that came into the paper that you could say that chess was helping?
Well, we also, as we talked about, we mentioned other academic outcomes other than mathematics, but we didn't really find anything going on there. We also looked at this attribute, which we refer to as patience. So it's whether you prefer, something today or something tomorrow. It's sort of like this famous, I guess there's this famous marshmallow experiment in psychology where you can sort of eat a marshmallow. I hope I'm getting it right.
Well, I don't know it, so I'm not judging. It's just the first time I hear about it. And I thought, the famous marshmallow test.
If you wait and you can get more marshmallows later or something like that.
Okay.
I hope I'm getting it right. But anyway, a lot of tests in the economic literature on patience involve asking you if you want, let's say, one chocolate or 1 day later, or whether we give you like the bars 7 days later, just to see whether you are more present oriented or future oriented.
Would it make a difference?
So maybe.
I mean, I'm guessing there's a difference in the payoff.
Yes, that's the whole point. The payoff is different, meaning that if you're a bit patient, you can get much more of product or same item, and so the point here is that maybe chess can teach us or teach one to be a bit more patient, because just having to be sitting down on a chessboard, and we're talking about classical chess here, not bullet or blitz. But if you're playing classical chess, then you need to sit down sometimes for hours just to play a game.
Right.
And so maybe by doing that, it teaches children to learn how to think about the future outcomes more than just immediate gratification. So we also sort of looked at that, but we didn't really get any strong findings on patience. We also looked at a test other than creativity, which you mentioned. So I'll just briefly mention that we use also something from the literature in order to try to measure creativity.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think this instrument was called the
Sorry.
Torrence test of creativity. And but again, we didn't seem to get any significant effects there. So but you're right in saying that it's something that's much harder to capture and measure. So I guess the jury is probably still out there whether or not chess actually helps with creativity. And I'm not sure what the answer is actually, because creativity, it's hard to define, and chess is a very sort of limited sandbox in order to explore one's creativity. It's good when you're first starting out because there are infinite possibilities in terms of the strategies, the openings, and the moves. But I guess, as we know now in the age of computer chess, one doesn't have to be that creative anymore because, you just follow what the previous champions or grandmasters have done, or you look at ChessBase and then you feed it into Stockfish, and then and you don't really have to think so much.
Stockfish may not need imagination, but since I'm not Stockfish, I'm going to have to come up with my own solutions over the board once I'm out of my theory. So I think there's still room for creativity in problem solving. Obviously, sometimes the solution will fit a clear paradigm or model, a template of other solutions given in the past by others. But sometimes they don't. And then you're left to sit there, really just try to figure things out and try to come up with a solution. And sometimes that solution is very unorthodox, but you go with it because you feel that that's going to do something. And at that level, even if the computer will say, oh, because when I calculated 5 billion moves, this was the right move and whatever, well, I didn't calculate 5 billion moves, so I have to consider that my solution wasn't based on 5 billion moves, but was rather based on some degree of creativity in my problem solving.
I totally would agree with you. I mean, and that's also me, coming from my chess player roots, and,
Right.
and I hear you as a chess player too. For sure, that's why I still enjoy the game, even with computers around these days that are so much stronger than the strongest grandmasters, because I think it just makes the game even richer in the sense that we are reaching higher and higher levels, but yet there's still so much to discover.
Right.
It's not like we solved the game. Maybe we will. Some people say we will solve chess, in a few years or a few decades, but I don't. I hope not. But right now, I'm still enjoying the process. As we learn, we revisit the openings that we played, a long time ago, and suddenly, you see, you learn something new about the position. It's like, oh wow, it's like that's great. But then on the chessboard, when you're playing again without the assistance of a computer, then you have to think of on your own 2 feet again about what to do, and that's when all the creative juices can again start flowing, and it's great.
Yeah.
So yeah, I totally hear you.
Yeah. And you might even argue that by constantly being pushed into that kind of situation, which your normal day-to-day life may not necessarily demand of you, you're little by little honing that kind of creative problem-solving skill that eventually may spill over to other situations where it's not chess, but you're so accustomed to having to try to find your own solutions that it just comes as a natural part of your approach.
So yes, creativity definitely could be an important element that is related to chess, but because we were looking at school children who were just learning the game, maybe that didn't really come into play yet. Maybe that benefit of becoming a chess player only comes in later, once you learn at a higher level about chess strategy, chess openings, and how to use in today's context, how to use computers, and you understand games at a deeper level. So maybe a newer study on higher level chess players, would sort of uncover that link between chess and creativity. I don't know, but at least at the lower levels, from beginners, to novices, it didn't seem like chess, at least in our study, found this relationship between chess and creativity.
No, I understand. And plus, the study wasn't focused specifically on that. It was just one of the things it was measuring. So, looking forward, looking ahead, what kind of studies do you predict? Any more studies involving chess that you might pursue in order to unveil or deepen your understanding of what came out in this first paper?
Not at the moment. I mean, I've often sort of loosely followed this debate regarding gender differences in chess. So I've often thought about, it'll be something interesting to do some useful research on.
That's a can
especially,
of worms.
I understand it. That's
Oh
why
my goodness!
I'm very careful. But
regardless of
I
your
mean,
results. Oh, it's true. What can I say?
But it's very, because I have a young son myself, and I take him to the chess club, and we see a lot of like boys and girls at his age, playing chess, and you don't really feel like there's much of a gender difference at the younger ages. But something eventually happens, right? As we know, a lot of girls stop playing chess, a lot of boys continue to do so, and so I don't know. So I haven't really phrased the right question, but I guess it might be interesting to do an analysis at the much younger ages, where you would see fewer differences in terms of the abilities, the results, and maybe get a better understanding of why it is that many girls choose to select themselves out of chess, or I don't know, but it's just a broad area that I think
Sure.
would require more research. And as you know, ChessBase has written or published a lot of articles on this issue too. So
Sure, and well, it's not really. Yeah, I mean, we let's just say there have been articles published on chess-based, but it isn't. These aren't necessarily chess-based opinions. It's simply it's an ongoing debate by so many different people with so many different angles and approaches. Some are analyzing it from, let's say, the brain structural point of view, others from hormonal, others from education, others from opportunity. So I mean, there's so many different, let's say, opinions on what's going on, and some, of course, will just say, well, just because women are weaker, what can you say? So I mean, you have a lot of different, let's say, explanations going on in here, and so I guess the real question is, whatever approach you may choose, but it probably won't lay the question to rest. I mean, it will certainly add. I'm certain that if you do pursue it, it will add more information and fuel to the debate. But someone will always have some other facets to look at, and it's obviously. What would your angle be if you were to begin to approach this? Have you thought about it?
well, I guess a possible angle would just be the inclination to be competitive. So research in economics that sort of focuses on gender differences in competitiveness. So I think at a younger age, all children are, pretty competitive. They don't shy away from competition. But it seems like as young boys and girls age, something happens, whether it's hormonal or socialization or whatever, I don't know. But then maybe girls start to shy away a bit more from competition. So it would be interesting to see why, these differences emerge and when they exactly start to emerge. So by having, say, like, competitions that are first of all unisex, it doesn't matter whether you're a boy or girl, you play together, but and then you compare that with competitions which are strictly all female or all male, why, what happens in terms of the performance at the younger ages. So if we have the ability to do a lot of data collection or even possibly some experiments on conducting these sort of different competitions, that could, be somewhat insightful, perhaps. I'm
Okay.
not sure.
Right. Well, I mean, look forward to seeing it. If it does manifest itself, please drop me a note. If it does, I'll be delighted to see what you've come up
Sure.
with. thank you so much for taking the time. I'm sure this will certainly lead to, let's say, more fruitful studies and further investigations into the potential benefits of chess instruction. I think this will be bringing a new light to the whole discussion, and I think that's a really good thing.
Thank you for taking the time to talk to me, Albert.
Oh, thank you, man.